The allegations Meghan has made are simply not true. Her account does not reflect what actually happened, and it has led the public to a deeply misleading impression. That version of events has no basis in...
The allegations Meghan has made are simply not true. Her account does not reflect what actually happened, and it has led the public to a deeply misleading impression. That version of events has no basis in fact. Britain expected another carefully polished royal statement. What it received instead was a declaration so direct that even seasoned palace watchers struggled to process it. Prince William did not speak about reconciliation, patience, or a distant family compromise. He spoke about the future. And in a few controlled sentences, the future king closed a door Meghan had once believed might never fully shut. The announcement was calm. Its consequences were anything but. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William stepped into the briefing knowing there could be no retreat once the words left his mouth. A royal briefing, a formal palace statement defining the crown's public position, hid family problems behind careful language. This time he refused that protection. Meghan would have no future official role representing the crown, no route back as a working royal, and no authority to act in the monarchy's name. The prince understood why clarity mattered. Earlier palace wording had left space for reconciliation, selected ceremonies, and the possibility that the Duchess might return in a limited form. He was ending that uncertainty. William chose every sentence with painful control. An aide near the doorway watched his jaw tighten before he said, "The future of royal service must now be clearly defined." The future king stayed calm. The effect was devastating. Hours earlier, he had rejected a softer draft that spoke only of current arrangements, arguing that temporary words would create another temporary peace. Charles had read the final version. The king removed his glasses, placed the pages down, and told his son, "Then you understand what comes after this." William understood. He believed the cost of silence had become greater. Meghan read the announcement beside Harry in California and stopped moving. She reached the final line, returned to the beginning, then placed the tablet face down when he asked whether she was all right. Harry asked again. The Duchess still said nothing. Her silence frightened him more than anger would have because both understood what had changed. William had not delayed a reunion. He had removed the official path toward one. The shock was immediate, but the decision had not been born that morning. William carried the memory of one exact moment, one private exchange the family had never discussed publicly. Inside royal circles, they knew its name. It was the point where caution became resolve and compromise began to look dangerous. To understand why William finally closed the door, you have to understand what Meghan, Harry, and the future king each believed they were still fighting to protect. This was never simply William against Meghan. It was a collision between three people carrying three completely different ideas of loyalty. William saw duty as something inherited, disciplined, and protected at personal cost. Meghan saw independence as survival after an institution she believed had failed to understand her. And Harry stood between them, still connected by blood to one world while emotionally committed to another. The announcement forced every private wound into the open. Harry paced across the room, reading the statement as Meghan remained near the tablet. "He made it personal," he said, anger rising in his voice. She finally looked at him and answered, "It became personal long before today." The Duchess had built a life beyond palace control, but William's decision changed distance into official exclusion. Crown service, the formal work carried out by royals on behalf of the monarch, was now a door that would never reopen for her again. William carried a different fear. The prince expected one day to inherit the monarchy, and every uncertain role looked dangerous when he thought about George, Charlotte, and Louis. He believed unclear positions could create arguments during the first years of his reign, when his children would already be learning what duty demanded from them. Catherine found him alone at Windsor after the briefing. She sat opposite him with no papers between them and asked whether he felt relieved. "No," he admitted. "I feel nothing like triumph." Catherine reached across the space between them. William kept both palms locked together at first, as though releasing them might release everything else. Then the future king slowly moved one hand toward hers. She held it and told him that necessary decisions could still wound the person making them. The princess understood his silence because she had watched this fear grow for months. He was not only thinking about Meghan. He was thinking about what unresolved expectations might become once the crown finally rested on him. Meghan, however, had believed a direct conversation could change the path. A confidential request had already reached palace hands, asking whether limited ceremonial participation might someday be possible. She had not asked to return fully. She wanted the possibility left alive. Harry knew about the request, and he had believed William might listen if the issue reached him personally. But William had already connected that request to one memory he could not shake. One ceremony, one private exchange, one sentence spoken behind a closed door had turned his caution into resolve. And when palace officials traced the decision back to its true beginning, every path led to one ceremony, one private conversation, and a sentence William never forgot. Every royal crisis has a moment that looks ordinary until history turns around and points directly at it. For William, that moment came months earlier during a private Windsor reception arranged around a charitable ceremony. There were no shouting matches and no dramatic exits at first, just a short conversation behind a closed door. Yet, by the time the prince returned to the reception, his expression had changed, and the people who knew him best immediately understood that something irreversible had happened. Meghan had arrived carrying a request that sounded limited, even reasonable. The Windsor Foundation reception, a private gathering linked to royal charity work, had brought senior family members together around future international projects. Her proposal focused on a crown-linked initiative, meaning a project publicly connected to the monarchy and its charitable mission. She wanted permission to appear at selected events without formally returning as a working royal. To her, it offered flexibility. To William, it reopened the exact uncertainty he feared. William asked to speak privately. The prince listened, then told Meghan that royal representation could not be entered and exited according to personal terms. She stared at him before answering that he was deliberately confusing independence with disloyalty. The future king did not raise his voice. He simply repeated that public authority carried responsibility, and responsibility could not be switched on for ceremonies and off when expectations became difficult. Meghan felt the rejection immediately. Before leaving, she told William, "One day you may need people outside the walls more than you think." Harry entered minutes later and found her visibly shaken. He followed his brother into a side corridor and demanded that the discussion be reopened. William refused. Harry pressed again. The prince answered that the decision was not about punishing his wife, but he would not debate the same question through anger. Catherine found William later in a narrow private room. He loosened his cuff, placed his phone on the table, and repeated Meghan's final sentence word for word. The princess listened as he fell silent. Then the future king looked at her and said, "We cannot leave this unclear." That night, he requested a confidential review of every undefined future privilege linked to non-working members of the family. The review would examine who could represent the crown and under what conditions. Months later, Meghan's new confidential request reached William. He recognized the same question instantly. This time, there would be no quiet review and no temporary answer. The Windsor reception created the wound, but Meghan's next request forced William to look directly at it and finally face her without courtiers standing between them. The confrontation did not happen beneath chandeliers or before an audience of advisors. William insisted on something far more uncomfortable, a direct conversation. No press office, no senior courtiers speaking for either side. When Meghan joined the private call, the prince already had her request in front of him. She knew immediately this was not a courtesy discussion. He knew immediately she would challenge him. For nearly 40 minutes, two completely different visions of royal identity collided without disguise. Meghan began carefully. Her confidential request asked for a defined pathway into selected Commonwealth-linked events and major family ceremonies. Commonwealth events, gatherings connected to the group of nations historically linked to the British crown, often carry deep symbolic weight, while ceremonial appearances can signal who still stands close to royal life. She was not asking to return full-time. She wanted a narrow route left open. William had read every line before the call began. Meghan asked the question directly. "Have you already decided before hearing me?" William paused. The prince admitted his concerns had existed long before her request reached him. He said the monarchy could not carry half-defined authority because the public needed to know who spoke for the crown and who did not. The Duchess answered that his version of clarity felt like punishment dressed as duty. William did not interrupt. He let the words sit between them. William then revealed through the private recorded call kept for confidential family reference that he had reviewed a succession-era framework. The framework was a planned set of rules for how royal roles would operate during his eventual reign. It was designed to prevent anyone outside active service from suggesting they might still hold representative authority. Meghan understood the change instantly. This was no longer about one request. The future king was shaping his monarchy, and she was the first major person feeling its force. Meghan asked whether there was any version of the future where his answer changed. William looked down at the folder, then closed it. The prince raised his eyes and said, "Not while the responsibility is mine." She stayed silent for several seconds. He did not soften the sentence. William ended the conversation without reconciliation, but his final words carried another warning. He told Meghan that he had not reached this position alone. Someone inside the monarchy had spent months pushing for cleaner boundaries and had quietly strengthened the case he was now making. But William could close a folder only because the machinery behind the crown had already shown him exactly where the real power rested. Royal power rarely arrives with raised voices. Sometimes it appears as a thin file, a carefully marked paragraph, and a monarch refusing to interrupt his heir. Behind William's announcement stood months of private preparation involving constitutional advisors and the most emotionally difficult approval of all, Charles's decision not to stop his son. The king understood exactly what the statement would do to Harry. Yet when William placed the final framework before him, Charles faced a choice between fatherhood and institutional clarity. William knew his authority did not allow him to rewrite family identity. The prince could not erase blood, marriage, or personal history. What he could define was royal representation, the official right to speak or appear publicly on behalf of the crown. That distinction mattered because future royal service would depend on clear boundaries, especially once the future king inherited greater responsibility. Charles also understood why the framework had reached him. Any immediate palace announcement carrying present royal weight required the monarch's awareness and acceptance before it could move forward. Charles read the section concerning Meghan twice. The king stopped at the words, "No future official representative role," and looked at his son. "Does Harry understand how permanent this is?" he asked. William did not look away. "He will after today." The monarch felt the answer more deeply than he showed. He remembered his youngest son's previous departures, the silence that followed them, and every failed attempt to keep family pain separate from royal duty. Sophie had already raised the danger months earlier during a documented private consultation with senior family members. The trusted confidant warned that undefined ceremonial access could create competing expectations around future events. She argued that selected appearances might look harmless inside the family, but could confuse the public about who actually carried royal authority. William had remembered that warning. He had also personally replaced softer language about current arrangements with the far more final sentence now sitting before his father. Charles finished reading and removed his fountain pen from the table. The king did not sign anything because this was not a decree requiring his signature. Instead, he slid the pages back toward William. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then the monarch said softly, "You asked whether I would stop you. I will not." The prince took the file and understood exactly what that meant. The decision moved forward. Within hours, the announcement crossed the Atlantic, reached Harry, and triggered a reaction far faster than palace advisors had expected. The king's silence gave William room to act, and the moment the announcement crossed the Atlantic, the family consequences began moving faster than the palace could contain them. Harry's first reaction was anger. Meghan's was far more unsettling. She did not shout, call an advisor, or immediately prepare a response. She simply read William's words again. The difference between temporary distance and permanent exclusion had suddenly become painfully clear. For Harry, the announcement felt like his brother had judged their entire future without him. For Meghan, it carried another message entirely. William had finally stopped expecting her to return in any official form. Harry reached for his phone as calls began moving between legal representatives, communications aides, and family contacts. Everyone wanted to understand the practical reach of William's declaration. Crown service, official work performed on behalf of the monarch, was now clearly separated from Meghan's family connection through her marriage. She was still Harry's wife. She was still tied to the family personally. But the door to future official representation had been closed, and that distinction carried enormous weight. Harry called a private palace number and demanded to speak directly with William. The aide answering tried to explain that the prince was unavailable. He ended the call before she could finish. Meghan watched him grip the phone so tightly his knuckles paled. She reached across, lowered his hand, and told him to sit before he made a decision that could not be reversed. "Do not fight him because you think I need a title," she said quietly. Harry stared at her. She then admitted the deeper wound was losing the right to choose for herself. Harry's phone moved again. A short personal message from Charles appeared, sent directly rather than through palace staff. The king asked his son not to answer publicly while anger is deciding the words. Harry read the message twice. Meghan saw his expression change, but he still wanted to speak. He still wanted his brother to explain why permanence had been chosen over compromise. William faced pressure of his own. Advisors urged the future king to release a second statement explaining that the decision was institutional, not personal. He refused. The prince said further language would weaken the clarity of the first announcement and reopen the uncertainty he had just ended. Night deepened, but the anger did not. Harry tried again. This time, William answered. For the first time since the decision, there were no aides, no prepared statements, and no carefully controlled palace words standing between them. Hours of official language had pushed the brothers apart, but one private call was about to strip away the monarchy and leave only William and Harry. There was no secretary taking notes when Harry finally reached William. No prepared statement sat between them. For several seconds, neither brother spoke at all. Years of public arguments, private disappointments, and family grief seemed to occupy the silence. Harry wanted to know why William had made Meghan's future sound so final. The prince did not hide behind procedure. His answer was painfully simple, because uncertainty had damaged all of them for too long and someone had to end it. Harry challenged his brother directly. He asked what right William had to define Meghan's future relationship with royal service. The prince answered that he had defined the crown's role, not her personal life. Crown service, official work carried out in the monarch's name, depended on clear authority because public appearances could easily be understood as royal approval. The distinction mattered to William. It also mattered because every family argument had become tangled with official questions neither brother could discuss without reopening older wounds. Harry's anger sharpened. He told William the announcement had made his wife sound like a threat. The future king answered immediately. "Meghan is not the threat. Ambiguity is." Harry went quiet, then asked whether his brother understood what the statement might do to their relationship. William admitted that he did. The Duke's voice dropped. "Then you knew the price before you said it." The prince did not deny it. William finally explained what had happened during the drafting process. Through the private conversation between the brothers, he revealed that he had rejected language attacking Meghan personally. The prince had ordered every reference to character, conduct, and motive removed from the statement. He wanted the decision limited to future royal function. Harry had expected condemnation. Instead, he now understood his brother could have allowed far harsher words and had deliberately refused them. Harry's anger did not disappear, but it changed. He had already been considering an immediate televised response, a direct public answer that would challenge William's announcement before Britain had finished absorbing it. Now he stepped back from that plan. The Duke did not forgive his brother. The prince did not reverse the decision. But neither man used the final minutes of the call to wound the other further. Harry finally said, "William, not prince, not heir, just his brother's name." William closed his eyes and answered, "I know." Neither attempted a goodbye. By dawn, the absence of Harry's expected counterattack had become a story of its own, and Britain filled that silence with an extraordinary public reaction. By sunrise, William's announcement was no longer a private family fracture wrapped in palace language. It belonged to Britain. Radio callers argued over loyalty. Broadcasters replayed the prince's exact wording. Outside royal gates, strangers debated whether he had protected the monarchy or hardened it beyond recognition.